dark and dreary outside, but it's bright and cheerful inside and dry. So we're glad that you're with us this morning, and we hope that the service will be a meaningful experience for each and every one. A few announcements this morning. The road rally will be held on September the 25th. We've asked that people meet at exit 139, the park and ride, at 10 o'clock a.m. Jerry and others have put a great deal of effort into the road rally, and it is traditionally one of our favorite events. So please consider that and mark it on your calendar. We are also updating the congregational information. Linda and Gary have put the book out on the table in the narthex, and we would ask that you go through and check it and make sure that the information is correct for you and for your family in that booklet. If you are not in the directory but would like to be in that directory, fill out a card with your information. The cards are available on the table as well. If you don't receive the monthly newsletter by mail but would like to, also make a notation in the directory or complete a card. And also there's a sheet there on the table about the One Call Now service, which is an alert system that we use for various situations that arise from time to time, and calls are sent out automatically to those who are on the list. So if you are not on that and would like to be, there's a sheet to sign up on the table. And Linda tells me she'll be available out in the foyer with the table after the church. So if you have any questions about that, please see her and ask, and she'll be happy to help you. And finally, Jeff has called a general board meeting to be held immediately following worship on Sunday, September the 19th. That's 2 weeks hence, and we would ask that all of you who are on the board or believe that you may be on the board, please try to attend, because we'll need to have a quorum and there is business that needs to be conducted. Thank you.
I have two little additions to the announcements. As I was sitting there, I thought some of you may not know what a road rally is. So please ask somebody after service. Those of us that love it would love to share it with you. It's a great day. Second thing is, the One Call Now system that automatically calls out to those of you that want to be called on the list also has a group called Prayer Chain. And so if you want to be on the prayer chain, please let Linda know, because we would love for you to know the recent needs in our community and within our church family. So just those two little things. Okay, let's stand together and call ourselves into the presence of God, who is always present. And as we begin our gathered worship today, let's hear these wonderful, thoughtful words from Harry Emerson Fosdick. Eternal God, the light that does not fail, we worship you. We seek you not because by our seeking we can find you, but because long since you have sought us. We do not seek the sun, but open ourselves to its light and warmth when it arises. We do not seek the fresh air of heaven, but open our windows, and lo, it blows through. So may our hearts be responsive to your coming and receptive to your presence. Amen. Creator of all that is, we lift our souls up to you. All the earth is yours. All who dwell here are your children. You love us, care for us, nurture us, and bless us, and we are so thankful. May we seek to feel your presence without asking you to restrict your movement. Amen. You may be seated.
Scripture this morning comes from the book of Esther, chapter 7, verses 1 through 8, followed by chapter 9, verses 20 through 23. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, that would presume to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was in terror before the king and the queen. And the king rose from the feast in wrath and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine. As Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was, and the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, enjoining them that they would keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday. And they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending choice portions to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written to them. May God bless the reading of his holy word.
Mercy reigns, unending love. is all like snow, the sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine, will be forever mine. You are forever
Sometimes we win, and sometimes we lose. I'm very competitive, I hope in a fun way. But when I lose, I always say, well, somebody has to lose. You can't have a winner unless you have a loser, right? And so that's the way I justify my not winning. It would be nice if we could take turns winning, but I don't think that life is that way in most cases. I think our atmosphere today and our world today is maybe a little more win and lose than I've ever seen it in my lifetime, or maybe it's just the way I'm looking at it. But it seems like we always need to have somebody that's right and somebody that's wrong. And so it's always one against the other, black and white, winner, loser. And I think I've told this story before, but we do have some new people who may not have heard it, but when I was a children's minister way back in the very beginning of my ministry, I had the children on Wednesday afternoons. And so we'd do homework and then we would play a game. Took them outside, I was a lot younger, so I could play games with them. And one of the things that we played pretty often was softball. Well, or probably wiffle ball at the time, but I would have the kids choose up teams. Well, we had first grade through sixth grade. And so we had very tall, very athletic kids, and then we had the poor little first graders who didn't know how to do much, and so they would never get chosen for the team. Well, I worked with them, and finally I, out of somewhere, decided I'm just going to start messing up the score. And so I mess up the score, and the team that had the kids on it that weren't quite as good, that didn't get chosen, suddenly all of a sudden was ahead. And the kids would fight me over that until they just quit. And they didn't fuss about it anymore. And things began to kind of equal out. The kids realized that it's not always the best to have the greatest team. Sometimes it kind of ruins the fun. So there's a lot of controversy out that if all children get a trophy for participation, then those who are the best are not quite honored as much. And I can understand that when you get an award or get a trophy for being number one. Our road rally, we do have a number one trophy. That it is fun and you feel like you've accomplished something. And those that worry about that, taking it away and giving trophies to everybody, say that then we're not teaching kids to do their best, to strive, to excel. And Labor Day, which I all of a sudden realized, I wasn't really sure how we celebrate on Labor Day, but one of the things we celebrate is our American workers who've worked hard to make our country great. That work, a lot of them come from very little to a lot through their labors, and so we're celebrating the common worker. But then the other side, when my grandchildren were little, we played cards all the time. And I gave them a little slack. I mean, how would they feel if Grandma beat them every single time we played? Well, as it got better and better and better, I slacked off. And of course, now they beat me, and so now it's we're really at it. But I worried about their little egos if they constantly were beat down. And so often it's those children who are physically or mentally not athletic who never can do the best. And athletics seem to be pretty big in our world. And we see also the mental problems of those who are on top and must keep on being better and better and better, and how that wreaks havoc on them too. And so I wonder about this best and worst and right and wrong and how all of that works out. But the book of Esther is definitely a book or a story about right and wrong. If you're wrong, you lose your life. If you're right, you can live. And it's pretty black and white. And so to paraphrase our story a little bit for those who may not have been able to be here the last few weeks, we have King Ahasuerus, and he has a huge kingdom, and he's invited all of the leaders to come to a huge banquet, a huge feast, and it lasts half a year. Now, Jewish rabbis say this is not a true story. It is a story with truths, but that a kingdom could never last if it were 6 months of partying, a lot of drinking. And so during this time, King Ahasuerus calls in his queen, Vashti, and tells her to come wearing her crown, maybe only her crown, and she refused. Well, that threw everything into a tizzy, and so Ahasuerus said, what am I going to do? Because what she's done, all the women in the kingdom are going to do the same thing and think that they can buck the system or say no at any time. And so this edict goes out that all women have to obey their husbands. Well, then, the first sermon in our series was the morning after. He woke up, maybe not the morning after, we're not really sure, but woke up and regretted what he did. Kind of that hangover time, maybe. And so then he said, now what am I going to do? And his advisors manipulated him and said, well, okay, call in all of the virgins in the village, in the kingdom, and choose a new queen. That's how our Esther comes into the picture. She is among those that are chosen. They went through beauty treatments for a year, and then the king tried them out, and your minds can go however you want with that. And then he chose who he wanted to be his new king. Well, Esther had an uncle, Mordecai, and Mordecai watched out for her. She was an orphan, and she was Jewish. And this was not a Jewish kingdom. The Jewish people were the minority in that kingdom. And so Mordecai said, don't tell him your ethnicity. So she was quiet about it, but he kind of watched her. And he was on the gate, or employed at the gate. Now, in that day and time, we're not real sure if being employed at the gate meant anything other than protecting the king, but he had a position. Well, at the same time, we have this very strange little verse that says Haman was promoted. And Haman is an Agagite, and Mordecai is a Benjamite. And then it goes on with the story. Well, there's an ancient feud between the Agagites and the Benjamites, so he may not be too happy with Mordecai because of Mordecai's ethnicity. And then Haman sent out an edict saying that everyone had to bow down to him, which Mordecai refused to do. So we're not sure how this started, but what Haman convinced the king to do was to send out an edict that on a particular day, and they threw dice to figure out when that day was, that on that particular day, all the Jews in the kingdom would be killed. Genocide. So Esther doesn't know what's going on the outside. Mordecai gets word to her, and she says, no, I can't do anything about it. If I go into the king's presence, I'll be killed. Automatically, you're killed. Unless the king happens to put out his scepter and happens to let you in, be okay with it. She said, I can't do that. And so this second sermon, Mordecai said, maybe you were born for such a time as this in the royal community, or being placed in the royal community. And so Esther said that word, yes, I will tell everyone to go to fast and to pray in preparation. And so she went to the king. The king did hold out his scepter. She asked, we don't know if she lost her nerve and was going to ask at that time for freedom for her people, but for whatever reason, she asked for Haman and for King Ahasuerus to come to a banquet. Well, then she had a banquet. We're not sure again if she lost her nerve, but she did not ask. She invited them to come back to another banquet. And that's where we start our story today. So in verse 1, it says, so the king and Haman went into the feast, not banquet. Feast in the Hebrew has a little bit different connotation. It's not just eating politely with one another. It has the feast, the festival, more of the drinking possibly, and that kind of is another reason that we feel like it was more of a party atmosphere is because it says on the second day, as they were drinking wine, highlighted, the king again said to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. This is pretty serious. He's saying even half of my kingdom you may have if you ask for it. Esther answered, well, old age, glasses, and a mic don't go together. There we go. Okay. So the queen answered, if I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my petition. Not only does she ask for her life, which is much greater and more important than half the kingdom, but then she says, and the lives of my people. That is my request. Not only for her own safety, but for her people. And then she reminds the king, for we have been sold, I and my people, not to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king. So what she's saying, if we had been sold into slavery, it wouldn't have been so bad. They would have lived. But death is death, and that can't be reversed. So King Ahasuerus condemned an unknown group within his kingdom. He didn't have a face or a name to go with that group. And I say that we often do that, even in our society. It's easy to say all certain ethnicities or all certain faiths are this way, when in reality, they may not be until we meet someone who is within that faith or that ethnicity. Or we have groups, we have many groups, any that you can name. It may not be a group that we particularly hate, but a group that we're maybe vocally against. But when we meet them, we sit down with them, we have a name and a face to go with that group, we may not agree with them, but we begin to maybe understand them. And so when King Ahasuerus realized that the group that he was going to annihilate was the same group that his queen and Mordecai, who was a trusted servant, that they were part of that group and would be killed, he allowed Mordecai and Esther to write a new edict. Now, there are times when groups go wrong. I am very against violent ideology and violence against or keeping people from having certain human rights. And there are times when those things need correction, such as World War II with Hitler. So it's not an easy yes or no, or it's not a right or wrong. But in this case, the Jews were tolerated before Haman asked for their annihilation. And so, but we we see that they had assimilated into society. Mordecai was at the gate. He was an employed servant. And we don't read that Esther was insisting on her Jewish practices or beliefs. And they, at this time, didn't seem to be a violent people under this Persian rule. So Ahasuerus needed a name and a face because of what he let happen. I remember when I was a female pastor, and I'm glad that I'm kind of past the female pastor, and people call me a pastor. There's, in my opinion, doesn't need to be male and female pastors. We're just all pastors. But I was in a denomination that had female pastors, but churches weren't really willing to hire female pastors. And so one of my professors said, they just need some names and faces. He said, let a female pastor be in the pulpit for a week or two, and they won't even think about the fact that she's female and not male. And so it's this idea, when we get to know someone, it's a little harder to be against them. Well, the king was, when he found out Haman had asked for this, what really was going on, he had him impaled on a pole 75 feet high, this exaggeration in this wonderful book, which had been prepared for Mordecai. Mordecai was given his property, given honor, and then, like I said, allowed Mordecai and Esther to write a new edict. Well, the original edict apparently could not be taken away, could not be reversed. So they wrote an edict that said that the Jewish people could fight back on that day that they were to be annihilated. And then it goes a little bit further, and I encourage you to read and find out what step farther it went. We're not going to talk about that today. But Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So we have these two women. We have Vashti, the queen who was decrowned, and we have Esther, the poor Jewish girl, orphan, who became the queen. Both were bold and courageous, but they worked through the system in two different ways. Vashti defied it. She said, I won't do it. Esther, however, worked through the system. She had limited power. Vashti had greater power, and so they did it in different ways. But I said at the beginning that we had clear winners and clear losers. But did we? We have the winners, Esther and Mordecai, the Jewish people, and Then, in our second little piece to our scripture, it begins the festival of Purim. Purim. And then we have the losers, Vashti, who lost her crown, and Haman, who lost his life. But it isn't that clear. You see, Esther remained alive. That's why she's a winner. She did become queen, but she had to live with King Ahasuerus, a man who throughout the book was easily manipulated, liked a long, hard party, was proud of his wealth and his ownership, land and people, wielded his power in impulsive ways, and had, it seems, maybe a violent temper. Vashti, however, lost a crown, but she retained her dignity and her integrity. And she no longer had to live with King Ahasuerus, who was rash, impulsive, manipulated, and party-going. So maybe we shouldn't worry anymore about who's winning and who's losing, but live instead by the old adage that says it's not whether we win or lose, but how we play the game. And when I say that, I don't say fairness, because fairness is often controversial, and there could be flaws in the game rules. But maybe we need to pay attention to how we play the game in terms of our good health, alive versus dead, maybe, or maybe wellness of our body and our soul. And maybe we need to play the game with boldness and integrity. Amen. I'm so glad to see everyone here today. It's